Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Arkwright. This is a 2 to 4 player stock holding investment economic game where you take the role of industrialist running up to 4 factories in 18th century England. You'll be building or upgrading your factories, hiring and firing workers, producing and selling goods, trying to have the most valuable portfolio. How do you have the most valuable portfolio and win the game? By having the highest valued company, which is the number of shares times your share value at the end of the game. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components, setup, and how gameplay works in Arkwright. Now let's look at the components. You have your main game board, double-sided special markers mat, one side for the water frame and one side for the spinning jenny, factory mat, double-sided harbor mat, timetable indicators, start player token, neutral importer markers, competition award markers, worker tokens, machine tokens, generic goods tokens, and then in each of the factory goods colors, you have economy markers and specific factory goods tokens. You have bread, which indicates food, shirts, which indicate clothing, forks and knives, which indicate cutlery, and lamps, which indicate lamps. And then in each of the player colors, you have your share value indicator, bonus markers, price indicators, appeal indicators, share markers in 5s and 1s, action markers, and then each player will have their own set of quality markers, distribution markers, factory markers, and contract markers. Next, we have the advanced action markers. These are in light gray and dark gray. Event markers, development tiles, ships, money, player aids, player's book, and then finally 2 rule books. One rule book for a shorter game called Spinning Jenny, and the other rule book for the full game called Water Frame. Now let's take a look at the setup. We're going to be setting this up for a 3-player waterfront game, which takes 13 steps. Step 1, place the main board. Place the main board in the center of the play area and a timetable indicator on 1760. Step 2, place event markers. You'll place the end of game event marker on the 1810 event space face down. Then you will separate the bureaucracy tile from the rest of event markers. Then you will shuffle and place an event face down on the 1800 event space. Then you will draw 2 more event markers and then shuffle them with the bureaucracy event marker to place on the 1770 to 1790 event spaces. You will place these markers face down, and if it's your first game, there is a predetermined setup in the rulebook. And in a 2-player game, you are to remove event markers that are described in the rulebook. Step 3, prepare economy. You'll separate, shuffle, and place economy markers by type. So you'll separate the economy markers by type, shuffle them, and then place them face down on the timetable. Then you will return the remaining back to the box. In a 2-player game, you are to remove the economy markers with 3 workers back to the job market and put them back in the game box. Step 4, place neutral markers and workers. You'll place the neutral importer markers on the 0 on the market share table, and then you'll place workers on each of the spaces on the job market and remove a number based on the number of players. In a 4-player game, you'll move 4 to the fired worker space. In a 3-player game, you'll move 8 to the fired worker space. And then in a 2-player game, you'll move 4 to the fired worker space and 8 back to the box. It's good to keep in mind that workers are limited. Step 5, create resource pools. Create resource pools for money, goods, and machines. Step 6, choose a color and get player components. Each player will choose a color and get the corresponding share value indicator, price indicators, appeal indicators, share markers, action markers, bonus markers if you're playing with the self-actor variant, as well as a factory mat, set of factory markers, quality markers, distribution markers, a harbor mat, and 4 contract markers. Step 7, set up player components. You'll place your appeal indicators on 0 on the market share table on the main board, your share value indicator on 10, place the factory mat in the middle of your play area with the price indicators next to the price scales. You'll sort and place your factory markers next to your factory mat, along with the action markers, shares, quality, and distribution markers. Then you'll place the harbor mat using a side based on the number of players. One side is for a 2-player game, and the other side is for a 3 to 4 player game. And then you'll place the contract markers next to the harbor mat. Step 8, return shares and choose a start player. Each player is going to keep 3 of the 5 shares markers and return the rest to the bank. Then you will randomly choose a start player and give them the start player marker. For this game, the start player will be yellow. Step 9, place special markers. You'll place the special markers mat next to the main board using a side based on the game you're playing. Then you'll place a timetable indicator on 1760/1770. You will stack the ships on the corresponding spaces, Then based on a number of players, return a number of light and dark gray action markers. In a 3-player game, you will return 1 set of light and dark gray action markers. And in a 2-player game, you will return 2 sets of light gray and dark gray action markers. Then you will shuffle and place the light gray in rows 1 and 2 based on the number of players. Then you will shuffle and place dark gray in 3 and 4. You will return the remaining back to the box. If it's your first game, there is a predetermined setup to the special markers mat in the rulebook. Step 10, place development tiles. You'll place the Charisma and 1 Inventor tile face up next to the special markers mat. Then you will draw additional tiles based on the number of players. In a 2-player game, you'll draw 12. In a 3-player game, you'll draw 19. And in a 4-player game, you'll draw 26. It is also recommended to use all 4 patron tiles in your first few games. Step 11, choose and build your first 2 factories. You will advance the timetable 1 spot, and then in player order, players will choose a factory to build. They will place it on the corresponding location on their factory mat, then take enough workers from the job market to fill the first 2 production rows of the factory. Then determine the selling price and mark it using the price indicator. Then you will determine the starting appeal, which is the base quality tile price, subtracting the selling price. Adjust your appeal indicator. Keep in mind that this is how much you can sell. You don't have to pay for your factories until the final setup step. So in this case, yellow chose a food factory, set a price of 6, so you take the base tile price of 8, subtract the price of 6, and that is your starting appeal. Once all players choose 1 factory, advance the timetable and do it again in reverse turn order. Keep in mind that it has to be a different factory, and there is a predetermined setup for your first game in the rulebook. Step 12, determine capital, shares, and special markers. Advance the timetable. In reverse turn order, players will decide how many shares to sell to create their starting capital. They will be able to sell for £10 each, and they can sell any number. It is recommended to sell greater than or equal to 4 shares. Recommendations are also in the rulebook. You must take at least enough to pay for your factories. You'll gain the money, return the shares to the bank, then choose a development tile or light gray action marker in row 1, 1760/1770, and then finally step 13. Pay for factories. Advance the timetable 1 space, and each player pays for their factories. Then you'll move the timetable to 1770 and begin the game. Now let's take a look at the gameplay. A game consists of 5 rounds or decades, consisting of 4 cycles and an event phase. Only 1 good is active in each cycle. Actions do not have to be specific to this good. Now let's look at the cycles. A cycle is made up of 3 phases. An economy phase, where the importer and job market adjust. Action phase, where each player takes an action. And the production phase, where goods are produced and sold and shares can rise. Before starting each cycle, you would advance the timetable. Now let's look at each in detail. Phase 1, the economy phase. Flip over the economy tile, advance the neutral importer, a number indicated on that tile in that good type on the market share table. Then move a number indicated on that tile of fired workers back to the job market. When moving workers, you place them back right to left and bottom to top. So in this case, the neutral importer advanced 1 on the market share table for food, and then 2 fired workers moved back to the job market. Then we go into phase 2, the action phase. In turn order, going clockwise, players will pick an action marker from their supply to place on their column of the administration chart. The action markers that a player can choose are the gray advanced action markers and the markers that are in the player's color. Then they would place the action marker on any of their empty admin space locations in the admin chart. They would pay the cost located to the right or left of that row. That action is conducted and the player can take a corresponding additional action, which is located at the bottom of that action marker. Keep in mind that you cannot pass, but you can pay and not take the action. If you do not have enough money, you must conduct an emergency sale of shares. If the action marker requires a payment to conduct the action, the player must place it on a space with greater than or equal to admin cost. So if blue wanted to use their advanced action marker and wanted to take the action costing £5, they must place it on an admin location that is £5 or more. If you want to use a previously placed tile, you would pay £2 more than the original admin cost. So if one was located on 6, you wanted to use it again, you would pay 8. Now let's look at the 8 types of action markers. First, the factory. With this action, you can build, modernize, and/or close factories. When building a factory, you would build a factory with a level based on the development level for the decade or earlier. This information is located under the clock. So in this case, you can only build level 1 factories. In 1780, you can build level 2 or level 1 factories. Once you've chosen your factory, you would then take as many workers to fill the first production, you would set your price, and then calculate your appeal. Your appeal is the quality based on the tile and any quality markers, along with the distribution marker minus the price. And then you would pay the factory cost. Keep in mind that prices are changed through additional actions. You can only build one factory per good. If you choose to modernize your factory, you'll replace the existing factory with the next level of the same good up to the current level located under the clock. When modernizing, the max you can upgrade is 2 levels in one turn. Modernizing is just as expensive as building, but you get to keep your workers, distribution, quality, and machinery markers. And with this action, you can also close a factory. This is where you remove the factory, workers, and machinery from your factory board, place your indicator back, and appeal goes to 0 for that good. Keep in mind that you cannot build a factory and then close it in the same turn. After closing the factory, if you have goods still in supply, they can only be sold in a warehouse sale. And at the bottom, the additional action would be to adjust the price. You would adjust the price of the factories affected by the main action. The second type of action marker is workers. With this action, you can hire or fire workers. When you hire workers, you may take as many workers as you like from the job market, placing them in your production rows, or you can place them on the warehouse to open up space for more goods. Workers are taken left to right, top to bottom, and if there are none in the job market, you may take from the fired workers location. You'll pay for the workers during the production phase. Keep in mind that you cannot transfer workers from your factories or ships. You may also move warehouse workers during this action. You can use this to produce again in the last round, but watch, because if you do not produce again, you will suffer a penalty. You may also use this action to fire workers. You can fire workers from factories, but they must be the furthest on the right. Your first production in the row must always stay active. If there are no workers in a production row with machinery, you must return the machinery to the supply. Also keep in mind that obsolete workers cannot be fired, or warehouses or ships. The additional action for workers is to take a special marker. This would be a ship advanced action marker or a development marker. The third type of action is machinery. With this action, you can purchase one or more machines. The amount is based on the price on the tile and the admin location. For your basic machinery action, it is 3 pounds for one machine, 6 for two. In this tile, it's 2 pounds for one machine and 5 for two. If you place it in an admin location that is greater than the cost, then the excess admin fee is forfeited. Then you would place machines to replace workers, and then they would go to the fired worker's spot. And then the additional action is to take a special marker. Fourth type of action is quality. This marker has a hand symbol. With this action, you increase sales opportunity by increasing and adding quality. You can add 1 in quality for 6 pounds. Keep in mind that you cannot use the 2 extra by duplicating the action toward a higher level. When using this, once you pay, you would place the quality marker or increase the existing quality marker and then update your appeal. The additional action for this is to adjust prices, where you are allowed to adjust the factories affected by the main action, or in this case, you can pay 1 pound per good. Fifth type of action is distribution. This has the megaphone symbol. You would add or increase your distribution, which adds appeal. You'd pay the cost of the increased number, so going to 1 would cost 1, going to 2 would cost 2, going to 3 would cost 3, and so on. The amount that you can use to pay for the distribution is based on the admin fee. And distribution is reduced by 1 during each production of that particular factory. The additional action for this is price adjustment, where you can adjust the price of the factories affected by the main action, or in this case, pay 1 pound per good. Sixth type of action is stock exchange. This is where you buy or sell shares, repay loans, sell from the warehouse, and buy contracts. These can be done in any order, and you may pass on any of them. You would pay the admin cost first, then you can purchase shares, where you would pay the cost per share based on your share value indicator, which is the white number on the share value indicator track. Keep in mind that buying does not change your share price. If the share value indicator is under 10, you would still pay 10 per share. You can repay loans, pay loans back at 13 pounds each. You must pay back loans before purchasing shares. You can sell shares to the bank at the share value indicator, which is the white number on the share value indicator track. Keep in mind that you get a chance to buy shares at the end of the game. You can sell goods from your warehouse at a price that's located on the factory, which is 2 for food, 3 for clothing, 4 for cutlery, and 5 for lamps. You may acquire contracts or increase contracts. This is where you will place or increase a contract marker on the bottom of your harbor mat. You need enough ships for a full delivery. This is a way you can get more money. And then the additional action is to take a special marker. The 7th type of action is ships. This will allow you to sell stored goods to the East India Trade Company. It's risky, but you earn large profits. To get a ship, you have to acquire it. This is done during the Take a Special Action marker. This is done during the Take a Special marker action. To use your ship, you need the ship, warehouse with goods, and a matching contract. When using the ship action, you would lower your share value by 1, then place goods back in the supply along with your contract to your supply and gain the factory cost per good. You can do multiple contracts at one time. You may also fulfill contracts and use ships as part of an ongoing production in the production phase. And then the additional action is to take a special marker. And then finally, the 8th action is production. You may manufacture goods in any one factory. The number of production rows that produce is located on the marker. So either 1 and 2 or 1 through 4. Then you would store the goods in your warehouse, pay wages for that production row's workers and machines. If the factory had already produced, you would place workers back in your first row spots. This is what was discussed during the worker action, where you added workers to a factory that had already produced that decade. In the last game round, you can put workers in factories whose goods have already been active. You would put the worker from the first production row onto the factory marker as a way to mark this factory. Once they produce, they would put the factory marker back to its regular spot in the first production row. And the additional action is a price adjustment. When you choose a development tile, you can take up to 4 development tiles and you would place them at the top of your factory map. If you get a 5th development tile, you must discard one of your development tiles. When you choose to get a ship, you place it on your harbor mat and take workers if necessary. On your harbor mat, you can have a max of 2 ships. If you take a 3rd ship, you must return a ship. You are only allowed to replace a ship with a ship of higher capacity. Once you get done using a ship action, you would place that ship action marker back onto your harbor map. When using the ship action, you must pay the administrative costs at least as high as the capacity of the ship marker. After all players have taken their actions, we move to phase 3, the production phase. Before production, check your appeal track in the production row to make sure that everything has been adjusted properly. We'd start the production phase by producing goods. Based on the level of the factory, you would produce that level of goods for each complete production row. The top white number is a level 1 factory. So in this case, the blue player produces 3. Then you would sell goods. There are 6 steps to selling goods. Step 1, determine demand. Place that good token on all number spaces for that column in the job market. Step 2, determine supply. This is the amount all players produce, have stored, and the neutral marker. Keep in mind you cannot sell a particular good if you don't own a factory of that good. So in this case, green would not produce any. So in this case, the supply is 7. Then you would compare the demand and supply. If the demand is greater than or equal to the supply, players sell all of their produced goods going clockwise, taking a number of goods tokens from the market. So in this case, our demand is 9 and our supply is 7, so players will sell all of their produced goods going clockwise. So both blue and yellow produce 3, and based on their appeal, they may sell 3. Had the supply been greater than the demand, you would place a tracker token on the appeal track on the highest number that a player is located on that particular good on the appeal track. Then the player on this number would take 1 good from the job market column and place it on their factory board. Then they would move the tracker down 1 and do it again. When multiple players are taking goods, the neutral marker will always go last. The higher quality would be the tiebreaker, and then you would take it at the same time. This process would repeat until all tokens are taken from the job market. In this process, you cannot take more than you can make. You can sell stored goods this way by taking a good token and placing it next to the one you would sell. Step 4, you would gain money equal to the number of goods sold times the price. So blue would gain 15, and yellow would gain 18. Step 5, increase your share value. If you sold 1, your share value would go up 1. If you sold 2 or more, it would go up 2. The patron would count toward this increase. The player with the highest appeal would go up another on the share value track if they sold goods, and then the most goods sold goes up 1. If there is a tie for the most goods or the highest appeal, then neither get the share value increase. So in this case, yellow and blue only go up 2. Then you would return all of the sold goods and any goods left in the job market column back to the supply. Then we would pay wages. Machines and workers for the active goods must be paid, 1 for each machine, and then each worker would have a wage that is located to the right of the job market with the lowest empty space. So each machine would cost 1 and each worker would cost 3. Any active good distribution would reduce by 1, and then you would adjust your appeal. And then optionally, you can ship active goods. If you have a ship and the goods available, you can determine if you want to fulfill a contract of an active good. That would bring us to the end of the cycle. So the start player would go to the next player, we would advance the time track, and start the next cycle. Cycles will continue until the end of phase 3 in the 4th cycle of the decade. That would bring us to the event phase. The event phase takes 5 steps. Step 1, collect all of your placed action markers back to your supply. Step 2, pay for workers on ships and warehouses. The wages are depicted in the job market. Keep in mind that you may fire ship workers. If you want to fire a worker from a ship, you must return the ship to the common supply on the special markers map. Step 3, the event marker is flipped over and resolved. A description of each event is located in the player's book. Step 4, you would change the start player. You would compare the company value, which is the number of shares times the share value that each player has, and then the lowest company value would determine the start player. And in step 5, you would determine obsolete factories. You would gain 2 workers for each obsolete factory to place on your factory map. The obsolete factories are located in red on the timetable track. So in 1810, level 1 and 2 factories are obsolete. You would place 2 workers next to that particular factory, and then we would move to the next decade. During this time, if you need to have an emergency sale of shares, you would sell a number of shares, and for each, you would lower your share value indicator by the first digit on the track. So if your share value indicator was on 26 and you had an emergency sale of shares, so you would go down 2 for each share that you sold. If you do not own any shares and still need money, you can take out a loan. Loans are only available as £10 loans, and to take out a loan, you would place a share from the bank onto the share value track. The number of shares indicate how many loans you have taken out. Additionally, you would reduce your share value indicator by 1 space for each loan. Repaying loans is only allowed as part of the stock exchange action, and you must pay £13 back to the bank for each £10 loan. You must do this before you can purchase any shares. Cycles and decades will continue until the final end of game event. Once we reach the end of game event in the final decade, all players would carry out a final stock exchange action. If you have any loans at this time, you would automatically lose. Once all the players carry out a final stock exchange action, we would go into the final scoring. The final scoring takes 3 steps. Step 1, subtract 4 on the value indicator track and lose 2 shares for each worker on a factory marker. These would be when you placed workers expecting to produce on a factory that has already produced in the final round. Step 2, for any unfilled contracts, you would subtract the number on the contract. And then finally, step 3, you would then multiply the share value price times the number of shares that you own, and that is your company value. The player with the highest company value has the most valuable portfolio and wins Arkwright.